Hello, this is Domenico with Easynomics, and this is part 3 of the dissection of a paper 2 question that we've been following. In the previous 2 videos, we went over PED and PES in the context of wheat during the Russo-Ukrainian War. In the video information notes below the video, there are links to 3 articles, which includes this article, Saudi Finance Minister warns of growing global food crisis caused by the Ukraine war, in which the Ukraine war has disrupted wheat and cereal grain supplies into the global market. This article looking at, again, the Russian-Ukrainian crisis posing a serious food security threat to a particular North African nation, Egypt, and again, here, the Russian war with Ukraine impacting food security in the Middle East and North Africa, and the potential outcomes of riots, famine, and mass migration. I used those 3 articles to write a paper 2 type of exam for my students back in June. And paper 2 is quite a good assessment that also helps students with preparing an internal assessment, utilizing an article, dissecting that article, and developing an IA. Paper 2 is also useful for providing real-world examples for Paper 1, Part B. All right. So from those articles, as I've shown in the last 2 videos, I use some of the text to provide to my students. Again, here, this article, text A, is highlighting how the Russian-Ukrainian war is disrupting wheat supplies into the global market, where Russia and Ukraine account for 1/3 of the world's global wheat exports, and Ukraine not able to export via the Black Sea, and sanctions against Russia by developed nations also reducing the available global supply of wheat into the world market. All right, so when you read that, you should immediately think this is a supply shock, that the supply curve will shift in. The global supply of wheat, corn is decreasing due to this shock that no one expected of a sudden war between Ukraine and Russia. And that's going to be useful because we're going to use that for the question we're going to answer. It also highlights here that Russia is the world's #1 exporter of wheat, but also the top exporter of fertilizer. And fertilizer is a key input to produce food. And if there's a reduction in fertilizer in the world market, then fertilizer prices go up. Thus, as an input price rising, it leads to output prices of food also rising. Text B is highlighting how that the reduction in the global supply of food will lead to inflation, rising prices. And again, we're going to illustrate that in the question we're going to tackle. And in the case of Egypt, it highlights that 30 to 40% of the caloric intake per person is wheat, highlighting that there's a cultural preference for wheat, and this would be difficult for Egyptians to substitute wheat with something else like rice, because perhaps there's no cultural preference for rice. They prefer wheat, and that would keep their demand curve relatively inelastic. Okay. Um, so you can read those articles that are linked below, and let's go ahead and tackle the paper 2 question. So in the previous 2 videos, the first video, we tackled this question, part B, highlighting why the demand curve is inelastic and how there would be a direct relationship between price and total revenue. In the second video, we looked at market supply and why the supply curve is inelastic for food and particularly wheat. So now we're going to go over this question here, C. And as we're reading it, it's always a good habit during your exam to highlight. Using a demand supply diagram, the question states, using a demand supply diagram, illustrate the market for food in the MENA region. So we want to create a graph for that. Let's see if I can highlight this. Market for food in the, am I able to? Yeah, here we are. Explain the role of the price mechanism. Okay, so I should explain that. And also, how the price mechanism reallocates resources towards a competitive market equilibrium, as a result of a supply shortage. So I'm giving a couple of hints to my students of what to illustrate. So let's go ahead and tackle that question. So here we have graph C, the market for food in the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa. And I've provided two graphs. Either one would work. And one graph is really going to exaggerate the inelasticity of the demand supply curve, and the other one's not going to exaggerate too much. But in my analysis, I can state that they're inelastic, and that should be fine. Demand as review. My demand curve should be relatively inelastic because the number and closeness of substitutes not as available. As we read those articles, we see that even if people in this region would like to switch away from wheat, the article highlights that other cereal prices are rising. So there's no close, cheaper substitute. Prices of a variety of food are rising, so there's no cheaper substitute to switch to. So the demand curve would be inelastic. In addition, we know that food is a necessity, so it'd be inelastic. And two, length of time. It might take time for people in this region to change their cultural preference for wheat and switch to something else like rice. It might take time because they're not used to it, they don't like it. But over time, if wheat prices stay high, they would switch. But in the short run, the PED is inelastic. With supply, length of time, it takes time to grow crops, so it'd be inelastic. And the rate at which cost of production would increase can also impact this. Gasoline prices as an input for food production is increasing quite rapidly, and fertilizer prices are rising quite rapidly. So this would cause the supply curve to be inelastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and draw that. In this graph, I'm exaggerating the inelasticity. So I would be drawing a relatively inelastic demand curve. And I'm going to label this D1, which is equal to my marginal benefit. Or on an exam, I could also not exaggerate so much. I can just draw a relatively inelastic curve. Maybe I need some more space to illustrate a few things. So I can draw it like this. Either way, it should be fine as long as you're stating that the demand curves in your analysis are inelastic. Then the supply curve is inelastic. So I'll exaggerate that in this graph. And I'll label that as S1 equals the marginal cost of production. Here, I'm not going to exaggerate so much. I'll just state in my analysis that it's inelastic. And here I'll label this S2 equal to marginal cost 2. All right, so let's start with our equilibriums. Here we see we have an equilibrium price at P1. And equilibrium quantity at Q1. I'll do the same here. An equilibrium price at P1 and equilibrium quantity at Q1. Here we have price and quantity. Here we have price and quantity. Now, higher level students, must understand that commodity prices, such as food, have inelastic demand curves and inelastic supply curves, which explains the volatility of those prices. And this article highlights that volatility down here. So we look at this graph and we see that food prices change quite a bit, quite dramatically. And these dramatic changes in price is a result of the inelasticity of the demand and inelasticity of the supply curve. So prior to the Russo-Ukrainian War, global wheat prices were about $286 per ton, and then it shot up to $523 per ton. How can we explain that dramatic increase in price? That is explained through the inelasticity of the demand and the supply curve. So that question's asking me to illustrate the supply shock and how that reallocates resources. So let me label a couple of points to help me with my analysis. I'll label this equilibrium as point A in both graphs. And we know that there's a supply curve that's shifting due to a non-price determinant of supply. And that is, number one, a supply shock. All right. wheat and other cereal grains unable to be exported from Ukraine via the Black Sea, as the article states, and also cost of factory production, gasoline prices rising, and that's an additional cost of production to transport these cereal grains in the world market, and that's leading to the supply curve shifting inwards. Okay, so we're going to have the supply shift in from S1 to S2 in both cases. And again, either graph is fine. Here's S2 equal to the marginal cost of production, S2 equal to the marginal cost of production. So supply curve is shifting inwards due to this supply shock. Fine. So in the short run, we're going to hold price constant at P1. And at P1, the new quantity supplied is right here at point B. So here I'll illustrate the new quantity supplied. This will be Q2. This will be Q2. And here I'm going to make a mental note that the quantity demanded at Q1 is greater than the quantity supplied at Q2. Quantity demanded at Q1 is now greater than the quantity being supplied at Q2, which means that there's excess demand or a shortage. And excess demand also highlights that there's an under allocation of resources. If you wanted to remember, I can highlight that as well. Perhaps it's a little bit better to see here, but I can highlight that here we see that the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. Thus, there's an under allocation. All right. So I can make a note that at Q2, when there's a shortage, typically the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. So there's an under allocation of resources to the production and consumption versus what is desired by society. Okay, so when there is a shortage, that puts upward pressure on price. And as a result, price will begin to rise from P1 to P2. So here I'm illustrating the increase in price from P1 to P2. And that higher price will lead to a reallocation of resources. That would cause the higher price will motivate, incentivize farmers worldwide to perhaps switch away from rice production or barley production, let's say, and move towards wheat production because price of wheat is very high, profits might be higher, total revenue might be higher, so the quantity supplied would be increasing along the S2 curve up to that higher price of P2. The same thing here. The higher price is motivating farmers worldwide to switch away from whatever they're producing and switch towards wheat production. So that's taking us to a new competitive equilibrium at point C. A new equilibrium at point C. All right. Now the higher price also causes households to reduce the quantity of their consumption. From point A to point C, all right, from point A to point C, there's a reduction in the quantity of demand according to the law of demand as a result of that higher price. And that will take us to a new equilibrium quantity, which is Q3. And at Q3, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and we're at the new competitive equilibrium. So again, in this particular graph, higher level students may want to exaggerate the inelasticity of the demand curve and the inelasticity of the supply curve to really highlight the change in price being much greater than the change in the quantity from here to here. So since we know PED is less than 1, PES is less than 1, we see that the percent change in price is greater than the percent decrease in the quantity of demand, which explains the sudden jump in the price of wheat. Again, when we look at this, we see that sudden jump in the price of wheat, and that's due to the inelasticity of the demand and the supply curve. Standard level students and even higher level students can draw the model like this. They don't have to exaggerate the increase in price. They can just state in their analysis that the demand and supply curves are inelastic, and that would be fine as well. So I'm going to quickly analyze this as I would for a paper exam. As can be seen in graph C, we're illustrating the market for food in the MENA region. I'm measuring the price of food on the y-axis and the quantity of food on the x-axis. I have two upward sloping supply curves according to a law of supply, labeled S1 and S2, which is equal to my marginal cost of production. And we will note that the supply curve is inelastic, where PES is less than 1 due to perhaps length of time and the rate at which costs of production are increasing. The demand curve is downward sloping, labeled D1. It's equal to our marginal benefit. And we notice that the PED is inelastic due to number and closeness of substitutes, or the lack of close, cheap substitutes available in the global food market. The fact that food is a necessity and length of time. It may take time for Egyptians, for example, to switch from wheat towards rice. In the short run, they will continue to consume wheat. Perhaps in the long run, they will switch to rice if it's cheaper. We have an initial equilibrium at point A, where S1 equals D1. That establishes an equilibrium price at P1 and an equilibrium quantity at Q1, where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Then we have a non-price determinant of supply impacting supply curve, predominantly a supply shock due to the Russian-Ukrainian war, which is reducing the supply of wheat and other cereal grains into the global market, and also fertilizer as an input for food. And also we notice that the costs of production are increasing. Gasoline prices are rising, fertilizer prices are rising. Thus, supply shifts in from S1 to S2. In the short run, we will hold price constant at P1, and at P1, the quantity supplied is at Q2, whereas the quantity demanded is at Q1. We notice that the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. There is excess demand. We can also state that at Q2, the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. There's an underallocation of resources towards the production of food versus what is desired by society. The shortage causes the price of food to rise from P1 to P2. As price rises, the price mechanism takes effect, leading to a reallocation of resources. The higher price motivates farmers worldwide to increase their production of food. That leads to the quantity supplied increasing from point B to point C, or from Q2 to Q3. The higher price demotivates or not disincentivizes households and to refrain from consuming the higher food prices. So the quantity demand decreases from point A to point C, or from Q1 to Q3, until there's an equilibrium established where S2 equals D1 at point C, providing a new equilibrium competitive price of P2 and new equilibrium quantity at Q3. All right. And with that, I have answered this question. If I can just click on that. All right. I've answered question C. I've illustrated the market for food. I've explained the supply shortage as a reduction of global supply, and how the price mechanism reallocates resources towards a new market equilibrium. In the next video, we'll tackle question D. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.